Well, good evening for everybody, and welcome to our presentation tonight, Cybersecurity, Protect Your Data and Yourself. We have a panelist of myself, Meryll Larkin, and Ken Nichols, and I guess we'll start with some introductions.
All right, ladies first.
Hi, I'm Meryll Larkin. I'm a new volunteer with Seattle Now. I have 30 years of experience in systems engineering, web programming, and cybersecurity at many different Seattle companies, including Seattle Times, Boeing, Clearwire, Ericsson Telecom, UW, and IOActive.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Ken Nichols. I'm the senior program manager at Microsoft. I've been working in the tech industry for about 25 years.
And Dennis Barnes, I'm a Seattle Now board member, and I've had a number of different careers, including about 15 years in traditional IT operations and setting up computer operations for small companies, and a number of other things that are related in security. So, oops. So what we would like to do is leave you with a few points here. We're going to talk in three general areas. General awareness, give you a little background here so that you can start thinking maybe in a manner that it helps you understand risks and assess what you can do to prevent them. Some preventive measures you can take, and then what to do if you click on that link or do something that you think may be harmful. But actually, I'm going to stop this for a second here and open the floor to the question here. If there's anything in particular you think we should cover at this point, anything that's been bugging you before we start.
And it's okay, like even if it's something like just something you've heard about, like scary things that have been reported, ransomware, like any topic from the news. Like, is there anything that's particularly burning or relevant that you think you'd like to hear about, or that other people in the audience would like to hear about?
A lot of negative press these days about artificial intelligence.
Like, are all hackers bad?
Or maybe they just talk that way, right?
No one can unmute themselves, I believe. So they may have to raise hands or something like that if anyone does have a comment. Or
I asked people to raise their hand if they had a question.
Yeah, otherwise.
Oh, okay. Did you want to handle it that way?
Right now, nobody's raised their hand.
Yeah, there's also the chat, so we're happy to answer there too.
Okay, we'll be taking questions, of course, along the evening. So let's head out and into our topics here.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Okay. I believe this is me. One of the first things that we should talk about is just, what does it mean when we talk about security, and what does it mean when you go online and look at a web page or something? One important thing that in the hackers world, like, we refer to things like a threat assessment, or like coming up with your own personal idea of what is a reasonable risk for you. So if we're talking, like, you'll sometimes hear the term threat model. No one in their regular day uses that term, but everyone thinks that way. Like, you just don't realize it. If you're trying to decide, do I walk down the street the long way, or do I cut through this dark alley? You're thinking about, what are the types of things I'm worried about happening, and what is my own personal exposure. The same thing happens with computers. If you're regularly writing, like maybe you're working with journalists that are saying negative things about the Chinese government, then that might put you at a greater risk of having Chinese hackers trying to get onto your system. If you're like working with abortion providers, then you might have another set of concerns about your personal identification, like your being released on the internet, right? So these are all types of things. Even having an abusive spouse in your past or something like that, like all of these are things that might need to factor into when you're thinking about what is safe for you to do, and it might be different from someone else who's a different gender, or that maybe is an influencer on Instagram, and so they're more comfortable with doing things because they've already kind of built that into their lifestyle. Having children like might change the way that you want to be perceived or what information you feel good about. So all of these are things to just think about and to come up with your own personal strategy for what you are okay with talking about and what you're not. For the most part, the internet is a wonderful place. It's full of huge amounts of information, more information than the Library of Alexandria or any other place. It can connect you to wonderful people that know so much, are subject matter experts on virtually any topic. There's a lot of great things there, but it also connects you to the worst neighborhoods, the most shady people. And it's reasonable for us to have to think about that, because even though they may be a small number of people percentage wise, the sheer number of people on the internet makes that a large number of people total. Anytime someone sends you an email or you have any contact that you don't initiate, just like when you get a spam phone call, someone trying to talk you into buying a subscription to something you never ordered or whatever, like you always have to be concerned about who is it that's reaching out to you. This applies in even in physical world situations where you charge your laptop or things like that. These are all just ways of thinking about what a vulnerability is. I feel like I'm going into a lot of depth, but the applications that collect your data, this is anytime you're downloading something cool from the Play Store to put onto your phone or things like that. A lot of these applications are free, but they have to do something to get paid. And so it's become very common for those applications, when you sign up for them, they have a little thing that says, are you okay with sharing this information? Once you do, then they can then sell that to third-party companies. That gives them a way to help them be able to stay in business, but it also means that your data is now being harvested and being sold, maybe in a way that you weren't expecting. It's been in the news lately that the police have been able to use data brokers to collect information that would normally require a subpoena. And it's been ruled as being completely legal because they purchased it just like any other commercial interest would. The third thing is the internet access in public areas. Whenever you connect to the internet, you're connecting to a computer that's already connected to the internet. So you're having to talk through someone else's signal, through someone else's wires. And if that person or people are less reputable, they could be listening. And so it's just because you see, oh, look, a free Wi-Fi place, doesn't mean that you always want to trust it. So it's just a good idea to keep in mind that, just like you wouldn't, eat off of a dirty plate, like these Wi-Fi points may be benevolent, but they also may not, like they might just be old, and the people maintaining them may not have known very much about keeping them safe. So they may have been compromised without them knowing, or they could also be traps that are deliberately there just as a way to to make things more risky. Or you might be in a cafe, and there might be someone in the cafe with you that's able to listen in. So it may not even be the provider themselves that's the problem. There just may be, it's good to just think about what information you're accessing and make sure that you're not like you wouldn't send your financial information on a postcard through the mail. The same kind of thing can be used, same line of thinking if you're at a library or some other place using a very public internet connection.
Great general introduction, Ken. Does anyone have any questions here? Raise hand. Don't see any offhand, so let's go to.
I'm just testing. All right.
And so here's some additional general awareness ideas here. As Ken mentioned, the kinds of things that you do might affect how you might want to protect your identity. And certainly there are plenty of reasons today when you speak out about public issues to make that necessary. Most of us use, well, of course, most applications use email addresses as their primary identifiers. If you use the same email address across all of your social media accounts, for example, one thing I didn't think of until recently came to my attention here was the idea that it represents a weak point. So if one of those accounts gets compromised for any reason, that generally opens up a whole range of possibilities of cross-referencing it. So you may think you're hiding your activity on Twitter, but in fact, somebody cracks into Facebook or your Google account enough to find out that corroborating information, and they're able to make the join there. And I know, Ken, you've got a lot more to say about this.
So every time you go on social media and you post pictures about places you've been, you talk about your children or like where you grew up, like things like that, you're leaving little breadcrumbs. And it's not that difficult for people to go around and start to put together a picture where they can start to build like a dossier on all of the things that they know about you. So this isn't to say that you should be paranoid. This isn't to say that you shouldn't share information with your friends, but just go back to that threat model I was talking about and think about, like, when I post this picture, what am I telling people? Not only does it show me having a good time, but it also might show an address, or it might show a building that's a pretty well-known building that they can reverse engineer. They can figure out where you were based on known information. An example, if you look at the January 6th protests, a lot of the people that were protesters there were able to be tracked down because of unique clothing they were wearing, and the fact that they were all documenting themselves. So things like that. Whenever you're putting this information out there, it's just a very good idea to think about what are you comfortable with sharing and what are you not comfortable with sharing, and realize that each of these accounts, even though they might be different, like Dennis was saying, people may be able to figure out ways of connecting it. And if they do, then taken together, what does that give? People can impersonate you. Like if they're talking to your loved ones, they know a lot about you from your social media. It makes it easier for them to pretend to be you. If they're trying to ask for emergency funds to be wired to them in, Kenya or something, it also can be something like, I had a policy where I just didn't post pictures of my daughter, like on Facebook, because no one really needs to know that I have a daughter. So I just tended to avoid talking about that. And once she was a teenager and she could talk about herself, then I wanted her to create her own self-image and not be chained to one that I had created for her.
Yeah, great suggestions. Thank you, Ken. Yeah, and one of the things you can do in this regard too is to not make those ties between it. Maybe you use an alias, a different email address, mix it up so that it's a little harder to put together that composite picture. It won't completely protect you, but again, as we're saying here, really, ultimately, nothing can be totally safe here. It's like a lock or a safe or any other kind of world here, is that whatever protections you have, there's somebody in some ways that are going to be able to overcome it. You just have to make it inconvenient enough that they go to the next person. Regarding personal medical information, there's a lot to say here. Luckily, in Washington State, we've recently enacted a law that will protect some of these things, but I have a feeling that it's going to get tested pretty severely in the difficulty of enforcement. What we're talking about here, those of you who are familiar with medical information and the HIPAA laws, is that there are strict rules within medical establishments about what your information can be gathered and when it can be used and shared with others. Many entities, and I'm thinking particularly of things like crisis pregnancy clinics, aren't medical facilities and don't have to abide by those rules. And as you heard earlier here, information can be submitted, sold, shared in any number of ways by information brokers. And that's particularly true specifically with crisis pregnancy clinics. And there is, I think there are some existing cases now where law enforcement has purchased the data and found where people have, they've identified people who are pregnant and also been able to corroborate that with cell phone location information and other things to know that they visited a clinic in a state that allows them to get an abortion, and perhaps even specifically that location. So just to know, again, we're in the awareness portion of this, so I'm going to move on. And again, if there's any questions, we'll stop for a moment here. Meryl, you had some things to say about this.
Yeah, I'm going to request that I can share my screen. So
In that case, I will stop.
okay. I'm looking for the place to share my screen.
All right. But
Thank you, Ken, for that definition of HIPAA. I skipped right over that.
Oh, not a problem. Not a problem.
You can do so now.
Can someone help me with the app and tell me where I share screen?
There's
Down
a
in the
green
bottom
arrow
middle.
at the bottom.
At the bottom.
Yeah, it should say share screen. It's green with an arrow pointing upwards right next to the chat. Like right towards the center of the UI.
Share screen. Got it. Thank you.
Okay, I see it. Yay. All right.
Can see it? Okay.
Yes. Yep.
All right. So good, because I can't. Okay, cybersecurity. So what Dennis said about HIPAA, the medical security, ties in very nicely with phones. So I'm going to do that first. The reason it ties in with phones is because I'm going to talk about phone apps first, and then I'll talk about connections. So when I was 15 years old, I learned how to program on an IBM 1130. And that was a mainframe and it took up an entire room. And this thing that I am holding in my hand right now, this cell phone, is more powerful than that IBM 1130. And we sometimes use our phones casually and forget how much they are computers. So for example, for apps, apps are convenient, but when we are using apps, we need to be aware of how the apps collect personal information. And Ken was talking about their finance model, their money-making model. So how is this app making money? Is it showing us commercials? That's one way to make money. Or is it collecting our personal data and selling it to third and fourth parties? That's another way to make money. So when you use an app, there are three kinds of apps on your phone. There are those that are pre-installed by your vendor, and sometimes you can delete those if you're not using them, and sometimes they're connected to other functionality and they won't let you delete them. There are necessary apps. Maybe they're required by your workplace, or that you need them to do something specific on your phone. And then there are discretionary apps. There are apps that you install. Now, you install apps for all kinds of reasons, but often you have choices. So if a particular app that you are installing looks like it is asking for more access than it actually needs, maybe there's a different app that does the same thing that doesn't require all that much access. So apps that you install on your phone. I linked to a page here that talks about how to check permissions. And so this is stuff that you can find on the internet. I'm not going to click all these links and show you because we don't have enough time for that. But there's links here that are about privacy and mobile devices and dangerous apps. So basically, you ask yourself a question. I've installed an app. Does it require more permissions than it actually needs? For example, it wants to access your contacts in your phones, your photos, but it's a gaming app. I use a gaming app that constantly asks me to make an account. It lets me use it without making an account. I don't make an account. If I made an account, it would be collecting my email address and other information about me. I can use the app without creating an account. It just shows me advertising. That's fine. Can it track you? An app, it can track you with GPS. So a lot of shopping apps get information from your GPS about where you are. And if you're in the vicinity of something it wants to sell to you, it can pop up ads to you. And that is a security hazard. In general, periodically, you should review your app permission. And there's a way to find out how to do that on the web, and delete apps you're no longer using. So some apps, you have to think about them when you use them. This doesn't mean don't ever use them, but think about the fact that they are collecting information. Exercise apps, diet apps, monitoring apps. There's a baby monitoring app. There are some baby monitoring apps that are huge security risks. There's a beautiful YouTube video about the security issues on baby monitoring apps. Then there are apps that are not what they pretend to be. There are some apps that pretend that they are going to clean your phone, and they're actually Trojans. And there are some apps that pretend to be VPNs, and they're not VPNs at all. So it makes sense, if you're going to be installing apps, to do a little bit of research on the internet about the app, or to make sure it's not asking for permissions that it doesn't actually need.
Ken has his hand up.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Ken?
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in a little bit. I typed a definition of what Trojans are in the chat. I think meaning it's from the story The Trojan Horse. So they're applications that pretend to be one thing, but they secretly have not evil armies inside waiting to spill out, but they're like basically doing things that they never told you they were going to do. There's also a great example of how when TikTok was brand new, and it was starting to become really popular, there was another program called TokTok that also did a very similar thing, and there were a lot of people that were enjoying it until some investigative news reporters figured out that it was secretly funded by the secret police from Iran. Like when people installed the application, it gave them access to video and to audio so that you could film your cool dance moves and then post them on the internet. But giving access to the files on your system, your phone, your ability to record video and audio meant that they could basically spy on you without your permission. They could hear everything you were saying. They could record pictures of stuff. They could read everything that you had on your computer. So it was basically like giving free access to the intelligence agency. So that's the kinds of not to make people afraid, but it's the kind of thing that people were just entering into these contracts, not really understanding what they were consenting to.
By the way, I forgot to mention, Meryl has put together these great lists of links here that we will be sharing with the participants.
Okay, so can you see this spot the difference on my screen? Yeah. Okay, so maybanktoyou.com is not the same as maybanktoyou.com. It's the A over here that's different. Sometimes these are tricks that hackers use to make you think that you're going on a secure site that you've been to before, but and this is one that's more usually used in email, but I just wanted to point that out. So
I had an example today of a text I received purportedly from BECU. I receive a lot of similar texts from banks I don't do business with, but this one came pretty close to fooling me. So it is very important to treat all these kind of things with great suspicion.
I've been fooled at least once, and I watch everything. So if I can be fooled, anybody can be fooled at least once. Yeah. So the other thing about your phone is that a lot of phones, almost all phones, when you buy them, they are not secured. They have default settings that are vulnerable. And you have to go and turn off these vulnerable default settings. And they do it for convenience. But every time I get a new phone, I discovered that they have a new way to connect that never existed before, and it's turned on by default. So, for example, Bluetooth is turned on by default. It is a short range connection. Now, if you're in your home, you can have Bluetooth on walking around, but suppose you're in a bus. It's not quite as secure in a bus. There's this new way to connect called NFC. NFC allows your phone to make payments. Your phone has to be close to this thing that you're paying, but do you want that NFC turned on by default? So there is a way to look and see all these settings. It's usually under settings, connectivity, or settings, Wi-Fi, and you may have to click into the advanced settings, but there's a bunch of these things that are turned on by default, and you should think about whether or not you want them turned on by default. For example, NFC, which I just talked about, that's making payments, and Bluetooth, that's for using like earbuds and stuff. And printing. Did you know you can print from your phone using Wi-Fi? But it also makes you have an open port. Is it encrypted? I don't know. So you might consider turning printing off unless you're using it. I mean, if you're not using it, don't have it turned on by default. There's this thing called nearby share that uncloaks your phone. It makes it visible and known to all nearby devices. Do you want that? Usually not. Not unless you're specifically looking for a device or it's looking for you. Wi-Fi hotspot, turn it off unless you're actively using it. Tethering, turn it off unless you're actively using it. Automatic connections to networks that you have connected to before. There should be a list in your saved networks. Delete the ones you aren't using. If your tablet or phone automatically connects when you go somewhere, find out what it's connecting to and figure out if that's safe. You can turn on private DNS mode. You can get to a private DNS will make your phone searches encrypted. And this is another one that you have to look up online how to do it, because you have to put in the name of some vendor that allows you to use their private DNS, but Google does, so it's available. I've got the URL here. Airplane mode turns off cell phone data and turns off SMS, but it does not turn off Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. And the last thing that I want to talk about with phones is QR codes. I've seen people go around with their phones and scan QR codes on posters. It makes me nervous every time I see people doing that. QR codes could be a security risk. And I'm just waiting for hackers to start using them and us to, because a QR code doesn't even reveal the URL that it's sending you to.
Just to chime in on that, I've heard of people putting stickers on, like where they have stickers printed of QR codes and they just stick them over signs so that the QR codes point to other things. So it could be very stealthy. Usually this is done by people that are like protesting like ads and stuff like that. It's not necessarily malicious, but there's nothing that would keep it from being the same as clicking on a bad link in a web page or an email.
Well, what my observation on QR codes is that they remove that ability for you to do your own risk assessment in some ways. When you
Mhm.
look at a web address, when instead of saying becu.net, it says a hacker in Bulgaria.com, you wouldn't click on that. But if you scan a QR code, you don't know where it's going to go.
Right. You might end up at a .ru, like Russian web page somewhere.
Right, right.
So I see we're starting to run out of time. But that's okay because I just did my largest presentation. So I'm going to talk about router security, and this is going to be much shorter. And the others are even shorter still.
Well, you did have a item for financial
Yes,
information too, right?
yes, yes, I do.
Okay.
So are you able to access your home router? If you have Wi-Fi that you're using in your home, you have a router, and it's either one that your ISP provided or it's one that you've put there yourself. And routers can be very useful security tools, or they can leave you vulnerable. Generally, routers are configurable, and most of them, especially all the ones that you buy yourself, you can access through your own web browsers. And they usually have what they call a local area network IP address. And there are web pages that help you find from your own computer what that IP address is. When you use that IP address, which is usually something like 192.168.1.1 or 192.168.0.1, and you put that in the address bar of your browser from your home, it usually gets you to a login page. And that is your administrative page for your home router. Home routers usually have default passwords and default login names, or at least default passwords. And there are so many people who never change default passwords or default login names. And that is a huge, huge security risk. Particularly with old routers. New routers these days don't allow wireless devices to connect directly to the router. And that's for security. If you have a router that's more than 10 years old or so, I might be able to drive by near where you live, log into your Wi-Fi, and then access your router's administrative functions. And that would be bad. It would basically give me access to things on anything on your network, because at that point, if I can configure your router, I can open up holes in your firewall. So the reason why you want to know what your router's IP address is to make sure that the default password and login have been changed, and they should not be the same login. They should not be the same password as you use for Wi-Fi. You want to make sure that if there is a firmware update, that you apply it. And these things are relatively easy. The first time you do them, they seem strange because you haven't done them before, but there's nothing complicated about them. Basically, you click on the link that says download firmware update, and then the router, you download it, and then when it's done downloading, the router reboots. While the router reboots, you lose internet connectivity, but then you get it back in about 3 minutes, and you've got your security, your firmware update done. And there are certain things, if you do get into your administrative, is somebody trying to communicate with me?
I'll mute. Sorry.
Yeah,
Just an echo.
okay.
Yeah.
Somebody, if you get into your router, there are additional configurations that you can make in it that will make your home network more secure. For example, you can split up your home network into a permanent connections and guest connections. Or you can, if you want to get very fancy, you can use MAC address filters. But in general, you can look, there's a place where you can look at the traffic and you can see who's connected on your network through your own router. Most routers have that capability. That's all I have to say about routers for now. Anybody want to add something, or shall I go to the next topic?
I would say that it's good to know how these things work. You don't necessarily have to do a huge amount there. It can get really technical. I know my dad likes to limit by MAC address so that only certain devices can even get on to the local LAN, but this isn't what we would expect a typical person to do.
Yeah.
And for the most part, the firewall, and I typed like a definition of what a firewall is in the chat. The firewall is mostly there to just keep outside requests from being able to get in. If you're on the inside and you ask for something, they can generally reply back. And
Right.
it's especially for web pages and things that use each of the different, like every time you open up the firewall to expose something, you're creating a hole in the wall. So the more holes you have, the more porous it is, the easier for things to get in.
I would think probably the best thing you can do with your router would be to change the default password. Most routers are shipped with a label at the bottom that has the password. That would be the way that you can get in, and just changing that means that again, as was mentioned before, older routers often had the same password. Now I think they tend to be more random than that, but certainly it would help your security immensely by just changing that.
It's also not a bad idea to reboot your router periodically. Even if it's working perfectly fine and has no issues, sometimes you'll get a performance increase if you don't have either a bunch of devices that are still in memory, or just sometimes attackers that are able to compromise a device are able to get onto it, but they aren't able to stay on it. So if you turn it off and turn it back on again, then that can force them to have to get back on again. So even just the reboot can be a good way to, periodically just kind of wipe off anything that might be there.
And you can reboot a number of ways, but probably the easiest is just unplug it, wait 30 seconds and plug it back in. And I'm talking about unplugging the current to the wall. So
Okay,
Meryl,
I've got two more quick topics. IoT devices. IoT is Internet of Things. And basically here, I'm just going to tell you that there are a lot of things that we use today that are computers or part of computers or have connections and we don't even think about them. We have RFID chips in our credit cards these days. I use an RFID blocker wallet. You can use a piece of aluminum foil, but RFID means that if you are close to something that is an RFID reader, it can read your credit card. Baby monitors. I think I mentioned that before. I guess I mentioned that when I was talking about cell phones, because very often a lot of these devices that are part of the Internet of Things connect to our cell phones. Baby monitors can be a security risk. There's a good YouTube video on it, on making sure that yours is secure. There's a lot of medical devices can be hacked because originally when people started making medical devices with connectivity features, nobody thought that anybody would ever hack them. But for example, if you can read your own pacemaker information, somebody might be able to hack it. That could be life-threatening. Is Alexa spying on you? These days we have devices in our houses for convenience that listen all the time. Not me, I don't, but some people do. And it has to listen for its name. So it's always listening. Unless you explicitly turn it off, it is on and it is listening. And yes, it could be spying on you. We have automobiles that have all kinds of computers and smart chips in them. And those automobiles can be hacked. I worked for a company that proved that it could hack an automobile and steer it somewhere it was not supposed to go. There are, medical alerts like baby monitors. Some of them can be hacked. So it's good to be aware that the Internet of Things has vulnerabilities, and it's a good idea to look on the web to see how to secure any kind of device that you're using that may connect to the internet or Bluetooth or some other way to other devices.
Ken, you have.
Yeah. So one thing I'd like to chime in is that sometimes people think, oh well, like I'm not anybody. I'm a small fish. No one's going to target me. One of the things about the internet is that you know how there's a search engine, how you can just go and use Google or Bing or something and find web pages. Well, there's a search engine called Shodan for finding vulnerable sites and vulnerable devices. So
low-hanging fruit.
So
people who don't know enough to put up security firewalls.
So if people know a vulnerability that they know how to break into, they can do a search and find a list of devices that have that vulnerability. It's there as a way for good people to be able to find the things that assess themselves, or to if you have a pretty big company, you might have difficulty recognizing things. So if you keep scanning there, you can see when something shows up that shouldn't, and you can go yell at that team. But it also means that you're almost automatable, to be able to be included in the list of people that get attacked. Several years ago, the internet access for most of the eastern United States went down when DNS was denial of service attacked. Basically a whole lot of little devices internet connected cameras and people's DVRs and all these things that had all been compromised and turned into zombies. So you think of a machine that's just sitting there, you think it's just blinking 12 because you never updated the time. But in the background, it's actually sending a whole bunch of traffic requests to a place that the attacker doesn't like. So they're able to remotely control all these little machines, get them all to send requests at the same time, and then that overwhelms the website. They can't handle the load. So they were able to take down the ability for people to access web pages, including Twitter and all kinds of things, across the entire cable provider on the East Coast. So that just shows how, you know, everything counts in large amounts. If you have a bunch of these little devices and someone's able to get them all to get up and start, you know, doing the same thing that they want, they can turn it into power and they can benefit from it. So there's a reason why they do this.
There's a really nice website called privacy.net/analyzer. And you can see your vulnerabilities from your browser in real time. And I went there thinking, I'm patched, I'm good. And I was shocked to find out that it knew that on a different tab, I was logged in to a Gmail account. That was something I did not expect. I expect, you know, when you send headers across the web, I expect them to know where I'm coming from. There's certain things I expected. What I didn't expect was that it knew that I had Gmail open in another tab.
Okay, in the interest of time, perhaps we can get to the financial information.
Right now. Did you raise your hand, France?
Yeah, when you were talking about getting rid of apps that people don't need,
Yes.
what about the Find My Phone app?
Well, if you can find your phone, so can somebody else. I don't specifically know about that. If you would like me to research it for you, I can get back to you on that. I didn't specifically research Find My Phone.
Yeah, I've used it several times.
Well, you know,
scattered sometimes.
so I call myself from Skype. I have a Skype account and I call myself from Skype, and that's how I find my phone. But,
Yeah,
you know, that's another way to do it.
Find My Phone, I think, is proprietary to Apple. It's not really, I think it's built in. Is that correct, Ken?
Is it built in? Is it?
Yeah, Apple and Android also has a locate my device option. I think Find My Phone that might be copyrighted, but the same capability exists. You can,
Right.
if you have to enable it. So it's like one of those settings that Meryl was talking about. You can turn it on so that you say, I want to allow my device to basically phone back and leave its current location, or periodically in a location that can be found, but it should be restricted to just your accounts or your family if you're part of a group.
Yes, if there's some way to make sure that other people can't access it, that would be a good thing to do. But, you know, if you have used it and if you have found it valuable, then getting rid of it doesn't make any sense.
Well, I was wondering if maybe it was the kind of thing that you could turn off unless you couldn't find your phone, but then you can't turn it on.
You can't, like, you don't have your phone to turn it on, then you can't do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that so every major identity provider has an accounts page where you can do things like review what permissions you've granted to which applications for which devices. And you can also, if you do have children and you add them where you need to have parental control over their accounts, you can do that so that you can make sure that they aren't able to go to certain pages, or it's there are ways that you can like try to build in some protections. I think that the device location is also managed in that type of thing. So you have to authenticate to prove who you are, and then from there you're able to see the information. But if someone else is able to get your credentials, and they can go and do the same thing.
Okay, we are now at 8 o'clock. Very quickly, banking. So if you have an accounting program at home that you put your financial transactions in, and that app accesses the internet, you have vulnerability at 3 places: the point of entry, the traveling across the web, and the destination. You have no control over 2 of those: traveling across the web and the destination. The traveling across the web, you have to look to see if it is encrypted, secure. If your app gives you a way to see that it is in fact secure and encrypted, if it requires a certificate and it is encrypting, then you can be confident about it traveling over the web. And then the question is, when it gets to the other side and it gets stored somewhere, is it still encrypted? Too many places decrypt on the other side. And then they store in a database your data unencrypted. And if they're hacked, your data is then compromised. So when I use an accounting program, it's important to be aware of these things. And some people who use online banking for convenience just check it all the time to make sure that they recognize all the transactions. And that's one way to do it. And that's a good way to do it. I'm lazy. I don't check all the time. But what I do is I keep my accounting software on a computer that has limited internet access. So my financial software is installed on the computer and it does not connect to the internet. It doesn't talk to things outside my home. So for example, when you have a financial accounting software, whatever you put in there is information that if somebody has access to it, they can gain. So for example, if I used to use Quicken, and it would want me to put my account numbers for my credit card or my bank account in the accounting software. Well, some people do that, and then they use an online connection to connect from their accounting software to their bank account or to their credit card account. That's one way to do it. That's not a very secure way to do it. I've made different choices, but what's important is to think about these things. For example, I never do banking on public Wi-Fi. I don't, now I understand that there are some people who travel all the time. And sometimes they are stuck and they have to do some kind of banking or financial transaction or some kind of shopping on a public Wi-Fi. If you do, you take the best precautions you can at the time. And then when you get home, you change your passwords. But that's the kind of thing that I try to avoid.
Meryl,
Yeah.
we're out of time here, and
Okay.
I'd like, that's a perfect segue into the next item that Ken was going to talk about here.
Right, I'm
So-
sorry. I thought I was last and I realized we have a whole nother section, sorry.
Yeah. So just to be real quick, what can you do? How do you make yourself safer, but in a way where you can, maybe like still survive? Like if you question everything and you turn off all of your devices and you bury them in cement so that no one else can access them, then you can't use them either. So how do you make the right compromise to be able to still live as a digital person and be able to get on with your life, because you don't have 24 hours a day to be able to focus just on defending yourself. So the very most important thing that I can point to is enabling multi-factor authentication for all of your accounts. So MFA, multi-factor authentication, is, you'll often see it where when you go to log in, not only do you type in your password, but then it says, we're texting you a code, please get that code and then type it into this box to prove that you actually are that person, right? Using texts like SMS or text messages is the least good of the multi-factor options, but it's significantly better than not having it at all. In order to break through multi-factor authentication, not only do they have to somehow beg, borrow, or steal your password, but then they also have to have your phone, or they have to have the app that you use for your registration, they have to have one of the strongest forms is there's a thing called a YubiKey. They're in the future, so FIDO keys are like it's like a little tiny key that looks like a USB drive, but this drive has a special certificate on it. So the certificate is like a really, really powerful password. So it's very, very difficult for anyone to guess. It would take, at current technology, it would take hundreds of years of them constantly working on trying to crack it. So having some of those devices, it makes it easier for you because you're able to just go, oh, my authenticator app on my phone just dinged. And then you say, yep, it's me. And now you've gotten a second factor. So that shows that it's not just someone who was good at guessing, but it's someone that also had this app. So it's unique. It's something you can do. Having a multi-factor authentication setup is a very valuable way to just extremely increase the difficulty, and it makes your password a little bit less risky if someone were to steal it or if it were dumped on the dark web or something. Passwords
Linda,
in
do you have a
general.
comment?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I had a question regarding the multi-factor authentication.
Sure.
In many families, people access the same accounts.
Mhm.
How would that work with that little key you were talking about?
Ken, did you get muted?
He's not muted on this end,
No.
but we can't hear him.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
I think the bad guys have gotten him.
I can't hear you, Ken.
And he's frozen.
Yeah, I think he's stuck. I think that it's still a work in progress, Linda. In one example we saw this very evening of a similar problem with current technology is the recovery email that Zoom sent to the Seattle Now account when you tried to use the account. Now that's two-factor authentication as well, of sorts. It doesn't ask every time, but since that code was sent to somebody to an address you can't see, it had the same kind of effect. I have
Right.
heard that there is some kind of an application where you can effectively provide a different address or a different phone number and have it go to multiple people for the kind of situations where you're sharing a Zoom account or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. While we're hoping that Ken makes his way back onto this, I'm going to zip forward and just briefly talk about backups. About the only thing, well, of course, everybody or, many people I know say, yes, okay, I really should do a backup. Very few of us actually do it. I do recommend that you it's getting a little bit easier. External drives are inexpensive. One of the things that I would particularly encourage you to do is to keep more than one copy. And the reason I'm saying that is that many of the times when you've been infected with some kind of a virus or some other malfeasance like that, you may not know about it right away. So you may not know that, last week's backup has this problem on it. I'm a little bit extreme here. I carry 5 generations of weekly backups. But certainly if you even had 2 disks and I'm talking about actually things that are physically connected and removable. People they may have some questions about online backup. I don't recommend it. I don't think Meryl or Ken would recommend it either. But certainly that's better than nothing, as we're saying here.
Yeah, apologies for that. One of the things I do at work is I run beta programs, like beta software, like patches on Windows, things like that, so that we can catch problems before they affect other people outside. So in my case, my computer crashed.
Did you finish your thought there, Ken, or can we proceed on to the first aid
well,
section?
So there were just 2 things I wanted to mention. So one was so there was a question about FIDO keys. If you do have FIDO keys, then your family can all have the same certificate. So if you have a shared account, so then you could do that across keys, where it would be fine. The nice thing about the keys is that they're extremely hard to impersonate. So they're about the safest multi-factor option for being able to prove that it really is you. The bad thing is that they're still pretty expensive. So so if you're buying them for your family, you'll want to have you'll buy several, and you'll generally, even if you are using it just for yourself, you'll want to have like more than one, so that you can have one backed up so that you don't get locked out if one gets lost or breaks.
So what do you mean by pretty expensive?
Let me do a quick search online.
And while he's doing that, we had our final section here is on first aid, what to do, and this is going to be a forum here, and I imagine it could engender some questions from people. In most respects, a truism that I've found in my career when I've had catastrophic data loss is the second thing I've done is the thing that hurts me about as much as the original problem. So it's certainly advisable to think about your next step, and frequently that next step is stop whatever you're doing.
Yeah. So right off the bat, like powering off the device or putting it in hibernation or sleep or anything like that. If you have
If it's an Ethernet connected device, unplug the Ethernet from the device. So you're not spreading whatever you've got to all your devices on your network.
Meryl's
thing
talking
with
about a
Wi-Fi.
network cable. Yeah.
Yeah, so Ethernet, it looks like a phone cord, but it's a little wider. So those, so just, you know, you have to think about it like if you were patient zero and you don't want to cough on all the people around you, right? Like it's the same thing with the internet. If you're connected to the Wi-Fi network or you're connected by cables to other things, you want to start disconnecting those really fast. You can also think about them as possibly contaminated now. So now you have to worry about, did my smart TV just get hacked? If I clean my computer and I connect my computer back to the same network the smart TV is on, the smart TV might just infect you again. So that's some of the,
Yeah.
good.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's just if you do have if you're at a company that has a security department, then like getting, you know, powering off, just like disconnect, power off, contact the security team, have them come and they can take a look, and they'll be able to do more analysis to try to, you know, figure out, were you the first person? Maybe there's other people also impacted by the same thing. They can start to try to figure out like who might have done it, like, you know, stuff like that. Not just cleaning it, but also, you know, figure out if this is part of an even bigger attack.
And then as far as Trojans and viruses, you know, one of the reasons that I do the backup approach that I do here is that it's very likely I might discover these things days or even a couple of weeks later. At that point, I'm prepared to lose a certain amount of my work to go back to a prior backup. It's a pretty fair trade against losing everything. And so that's why I strongly recommend multi-generations of backup.
And it is possible to do online backups. If you've got Dropbox and OneDrive and Google Drive, you can put a bunch of the same stuff in multiple places. And it's extremely unlikely that Google is going to go down on the same day that Microsoft goes down. But you still do have a little risk when you're doing it that way, because if something like ransomware got on, ransomware is like the termites of the internet. You don't know you have termites until the wall is like hollow and about to fall, right? Ransomware is the same thing. It tries to sneak onto your device and then it starts encrypting things that you don't know. Like, so it's taking over your machine in a, you know, so that by the time you finally realize that it's there, that's when the scary picture pops up and then they extract money from you.
So the one question I don't think I think we answered in our discussions here is, how do you find help? Meryl, Ken, help.
Well, one thing I'd like to mention before the how to find help was one other preventative thing that's really good, that because my computer crashed, I didn't have a chance to mention. Password managers are generally a very good thing, because computers are good at cracking passwords and humans are bad at remembering them. So by using passwords, we're putting people in the worst situation, because people usually pick something like that they think is clever, but computers can go through so many combinations so quickly that it's usually pretty trivial. I've seen statistics about how long it takes a computer to crack a password. And if your password is like less than 8 characters, it's practically instantaneous. The amount of, like, especially if you're only using capital and lowercase letters, then the number of tries that are required in order to find it is like trivial.
Yeah.
So how you put together passwords, like there are techniques for trying to think of good ones, but my preference is to use a password manager. And a password manager has a single password to get into it. And then once you're in, then it has all the rest of your passwords stored there. And it can generate passwords for you that are really big and really hard to remember. And it stores them so that you don't have to.
And a password manager is software, right?
It is a software. So so my company, we have an authenticator app that has a password manager built into it. I believe that Google also does. There are a number of offerings online, like 1Pass, where you can pay for a service that will like help take care of it for you. These are all ways where you just have to remember one password really well, and that's the one that gets you to the rest of them. So it's kind of like having all of your keys, like your card keys and everything, in a safe. As long as you remember the passcode to the safe, then you can get any of the keys when you need them. You don't have to memorize all of those as well. So that's a great way to kind of offload all of that mental processing. Trying to remember, more than like 20 passwords is almost impossible, like for most people, especially if they're really complicated, like with strange characters and things that would make them a lot more difficult. Now, how to find help. Finding help is a challenge. Like a lot of like sometimes it's very difficult to know how impacted you are. If you click
Start
on
with people you trust.
yeah,
Start with people you trust already. When you are in panic mode because you think you've done something or your computers might be infected, it's the wrong time to go looking for a vendor you've never worked with before. Unless that person is recommended to you from somebody who has experience with them and you already trust, the person who's giving you the advice. Stay away from new vendors. Let me see. People who you shouldn't ask. The salesman in the Verizon store. But if you have a cousin, a grandchild, an uncle, an aunt, somebody who is really good with computers, start with them. I did this happened. It hasn't happened before. I'm scared. What do you think I should do?
It's also really important to think about what were the symptoms that caused you to think that you have an infection. I've had people reach out to me because they're like, oh no, people are getting email or people are getting messages on Facebook that pretend to be me. What should I do? And there's multiple ways that could happen. One is they might have just cloned your account, or they just took the pictures off of, like they took your profile picture, they took your background picture, they just created a brand new account with a slightly different name, and now they're impersonating you. You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't get compromised. No one's like able to access your information except what you've shared. That's something you can report, but you can't do much about. If they've actually managed to somehow get a hold of, maybe not your password, but maybe a token because you were in a cafe and they were able to impersonate you because like until it expires. The best thing you can do then is change your password. Just if you can still log into your account, change it so that anyone else that is, trying to use it is not able to anymore. Right?
Yeah, I've had that experience with email where people have forged my identity. Good techniques can detect that, but a lot of times people receive these messages and they're not able to discern whether they're real or not. And I actually report that to my internet service provider.
Yeah, so you can certainly you can go on Facebook and say, and you can get your friends on Facebook to say, like, report this, so that there's more proof that it's really a problem, and then their moderators will go in and do something. You know, the same thing with Twitter or with other social media. But this is still different than if it was like you running code on your local machine. If you get an email with an attachment that says, like, I love you, please open this, you know, to this message to see, like, all the ways, and you click on it, and all of a sudden, like, a little box pops up and you see it start typing stuff in, like, and then it disappears. You don't really know what's happened. And at this point, you're now you've got a bigger problem, because it's not just about changing your password. It may have had time to download a virus, or there are things that are called remote access Trojans. So or rats, because they're just like vermin. Those things, if that's able to get installed on your device, it's going to be very hard to find, and it can be pretty insidious. So that recently, my wife had something like that happen, where she got an email that she thought was from someone she knew. She opened the attachment that was inside, and then realized that it wasn't from that person, that they'd been hacked or impersonated or something. And since we store our data in OneDrive and other places, I just told her to factory reset her device. So that's, you know, in the movie Aliens, there's a statement where they say, you know, basically nuke it all from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. So if you don't know exactly, if you know something did actually get onto your machine and it had the level of access to be able to do what it wanted to, the best way to just not have to worry at night is to just clean everything off and start over. The operating systems have been getting better and better at that. So now when you can do things like say, you know, I would like to restore an earlier version of Windows back to before the last latest updates. You can have it just, you know, you can even go through and just, you know, you just reinstall Outlook or whatever the apps are that you have on your device, but the information doesn't get lost because it's mostly stored in the cloud.
I want to thank everybody for what has become a severely long meeting here, as it sort of confirmed my fears when this topic was originally presented here, that we're going to try and pour, you know, 10 gallons of paint into a single gallon can, and that's just about it. Obviously, we have so much more we could be covering here. We will be doing a follow-up. Meryll's done some great work on the pages that you briefly saw, and we will be finding a way to distribute that. So unless there's any other final comments here, I think we can stop the recording and great meeting.
I will say that everything is constantly in a state of flux. The technology is always changing. It's really important to patch your systems. If you turn on automatic updates so that your operating systems and things are getting updated. If you don't have patches, then you are falling behind in the race, and that's what gets attacked. So So that's a really simple thing. Keep your patching, use a password manager, turn on multi-factor authentication. That is going to do a huge amount to protect you.
Yeah, and those updates, that's a fight I have with my wife, who never wants to update anything, but it's really important. It's no longer an option.
Because the software has problems, like it always does. It's so complicated that there's always things that people miss, but the bad guys don't know what those are either. When they finally find something, then that's when the good guys find out that, oh no, there's a problem, we need to fix it. So it's like constantly needing to keep it safe.
Yep.
Hey, France, I see your hand raised. You're on mute though.
I know you want to end this all, but when you said updates, I suddenly thought, I don't do updates because they ask me for a password and I don't know what that password is.
Yeah, we've gone through that dance in this household here. There's usually a way to recover it from the vendor. So it is something I do recommend you go through the exercise to do.
Okay. So
So
from,
we'll talk.
It's one thing if they want to charge you for it, because if you have a service, like, so if you have Windows, then Windows Update is free. It's just in the settings. If you have, for the most part, like, I'm not as familiar with Apple. I think Apple has similar types of update, but generally, you know, there are some companies where, like, antivirus companies, that might want to charge you money so they can upsell you for, like, oh, buy our identity protection, or like things like that. They tend to fall a little more on the shady side of legal, in my opinion. I think that they profit off of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. So, like, making you scared means that you give them money, which they don't have to do very much work for.
Well, there's a fine line sometimes between an update and an upgrade.
Mhm.
And frequently what you're talking about then there, Ken, it sounds like upgrades.
Yeah, so when they're having you like log in, then that makes me wonder a little bit about that, because if they're wanting to charge you for the service, then either you're using software that maybe has expired, that you don't have the latest, or or something like that. That can be the case. But if it's something that's connected to the internet, that's that you use, like, for, like, like, if you're on, maybe you downloaded the Facebook app,
So
something like that.
I
I'm going to go
was
ahead and stop the recording because we have already gone way over time.
Yeah, that's fine.
We
Absolutely.
did promise the people a certain length of time, so I think we do need to close it. I'm sorry.
Oh no, absolutely.
You're right. Okay, well, again, I thank you all. We'll stay on for a few minutes for questions.
Absolutely.